Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon for a discussion about understanding and reporting on digital disinformation. My name is John Hernandez. I'm one of two community managers for the American Press Institute's Trusted Elections Network. Just a quick rundown of what we do. We're focusing on connecting local newsrooms with experts and resources on election administration and misinformation. So we're still a few months from Election Day, and about 7 weeks from when mail voting begins in some states. But the information ecosystem out there is already littered with false information, confusing claims, and targeted efforts to disenfranchise voters online. And so that's why we're grateful to have Jane Lytvynenko with us today to lead us in today's conversation. She's a senior reporter with BuzzFeed News, focused on disinformation and online investigations. She'll run through some strategies for monitoring and reporting on false information, assess how false information tactics and actors have changed since 2016, and provide examples for reporting on misinformation at the local level. Before I turn it over to Smitha from Data and Society to introduce Jane, I just want to run through a bit of housekeeping. We're going to record this conversation. As you can probably tell, we're already recording for later viewing. You may turn your camera off, as you probably know, and you can change your Zoom name if you'd like to remain anonymous. If you have questions, post them in the chat at any time, and we'll work to address them at the end of the presentation or after today's call. So that'll mean we can collect conversations that went, we can collect questions that went unanswered and try to answer them later on. We'll send out the video recording and additional resources and answers to questions in an email this week or early next week. And with that, one more thing. And again, everyone's muted by default. Use the chat in order to ask questions, so we can also unmute people towards the end when the presentation's over. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Smitha Khurana, Newsroom Outreach Lead for Data and Society. Smitha?
Thanks, John. My name is Smitha Khurana, and I'm the Newsroom Outreach Lead here at Data and Society. For those who aren't familiar with Data and Society, we're an independent, nonprofit research institute that studies how data and automation affect society. We produce original research and regularly convene multidisciplinary thinkers to challenge the power and purpose of technology in society. In 2016, we began a body of research on media manipulation, reporting practices for misinformation, and mapping the information ecosystem as social platforms have changed the way information travels. We are having this call today to address a situation where public officials on all sides of the political spectrum have been actively lying about the mechanics of elections throughout the country. It feels like misinformation and disinformation are everywhere, including in the sphere of public health, and the imperative to understand and report on this phenomenon can be overwhelming. At Data and Society, we're trying to understand the problems and complexity of the misinformation frameworks at this moment. I'm trained as a journalist and have academic background, and since many of the researchers working on misinformation don't have reporting experience, we're trying to fill this gap and focus on how journalists can address this problem and how they can communicate effectively to the public. I encourage all the reporters on this call to reach out to me through email or DM on Twitter as you try to unwind and report on this issue in the coming months. It can be incredibly confusing and perplexing. I've been producing tip sheets on reporting on public health and misinformation, and these resources are available on our website and our blog points, along with our entire body of research on media manipulation. I'm honored now to welcome Jane Lytvynenko. Jane is one of the foremost disinformation reporters and consistently adds complexity, nuance, and clarity to her careful, methodical reporting. She has broken key stories in the past 3 years, and we all have so much to learn from her. I'll turn it over to Jane now.
Hi, that was such a nice introduction. Thank you. Before I start, just a note of apology. I have a very anxious dog sleeping next to me, so if she starts barking at my neighbors, I apologize. Like Smitha said, I have a presentation for you guys to share. Essentially, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about how we're thinking when we report on disinformation, what has changed over the last 3.5 years, and how reporters, especially at a local level, can make this problem feel urgent and real at a time when disinformation can seem like a sort of nebulous concept. At BuzzFeed News, at BuzzFeed News, we've got two dedicated reporters to mis and disinformation. That's me and my colleague Craig Silverman. But that's also something that we think about a lot as a newsroom. There are a few beats that are not touched by disinformation. And from the people who distribute our articles, our team who pushes everything on social media, to our reporters, we're all sort of aware of the problem and are constantly trying to think of different ways to cover it. I'm going to cover some big themes in this presentation, and it might at times seem a little bit overwhelming. We should have some time for questions left in the end. But if anything is unclear as I go along, just drop it in the chat and I'll do my best to clarify. I'm going to walk you guys through what we know about disinformation and social media manipulation, reporting approaches that are not just fact checks. And I'm going to show you guys some of my favorite tools that we use regularly to investigate disinformation. I won't do a live demo of these tools, but I will point you to some resources that will help you with them. And if in the meantime, anything's unclear, let me know. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is what we talk about when we talk about disinformation. The language around this issue is very difficult because words like misinformation and disinformation really don't mean that much to our readers. And neither do words like social media manipulation. So instead, I really want to encourage you guys to use more descriptive terms. And First Draft is an excellent nonprofit that researches this issue, that constantly is putting out new information on how reporters should maybe be considering about this problem. So when you're writing about misinformation and disinformation, try not to use that word in the headline. And when you're trying to describe an issue, this would be a helpful rubric to maybe be a little bit clearer with your readers. If they're looking at something that's out of context, if they're looking at something that's been manipulated, or if they're looking at a piece of satire that maybe they weren't 100% sure was a piece of satire. We've seen a lot of that happen over the last few months as well. And this is more for your understanding. So the issue with false information and misleading information online is that once it enters the stage of being on the internet, it never goes away. Sometimes it takes on different forms. For example, the claims around voter fraud sort of come back year after year in different shapes. In 2018, we saw the same blame of Soros purchased voting machines, sort of changing votes for Democrats, as we saw in 2012. And that's a 6-year difference where information sort of just circulated throughout the internet. And that's something that you should be aware of because it's always helpful to give that context to your readers, to explain to them that something's been around for a really long time. Very famously, the highway shark that's been photoshopped onto the highway that appears after every hurricane has also been around for something like 8 years. But if you give that context, readers understand a little bit better that what they're looking at is not particularly new, that there's already existing evidence that it is false or misleading. And finally, this is also from First Draft, and this is a little bit of a warning to reporters that it takes different stages for false information to spread. There has to be the person that posts that false information. There has to be a message that they post, and there has to be an interpreter. And when we talk about interpreters, that could be the audience that's viewing that message on social media, but that could also be you as a journalist who, for some of us, may be introducing our audience to that false message for the first time. And so there are steps that we as reporters need to take to make sure that it's clear that that information is false and that we don't perpetuate the loop of spreading false information inadvertently. And I will share with you guys in a little bit later some of the strategies that we use to do that. So the United States really became aware of the problem of disinformation and social media manipulation in 2016, when Russia has attempted to essentially rig the election in part by using social media. This GIF is one of my favorite GIFs. It is real life, honest to God, Russian trolls running to work at the troll factory in 2014, and they're running because they have to clock in by a certain time. And the reason why I show this GIF is to remind people that content just doesn't just come out of nowhere on social media. There are real people who are creating it. There are real people who are spreading it. It is not a computer problem, it's a people problem. In this case, it's students who were making money during their summer job and maybe weren't even fully, well, I don't want to speak to their motivations, but this is real people. And while we are on the topic of foreign interference, I also want to point out the fact that this problem has grown over the years. So the Oxford Internet Institute puts out some excellent research called the Cyber Troop report every year, looking at how many countries engage in troll factory work. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be spreading falsehoods. A lot of it is half-true propaganda. Some of it is sort of manipulating social media. But in 2018, there were around 40 countries doing this. Last year, it was 70 countries doing this. So this is a growing problem, and it's a problem that journalists will need to continue addressing in their day-to-day reporting. And something that I really like to point out about Russian manipulation campaigns that maybe isn't fully thought about is that not all of the things that they published were falsehoods. So what you're seeing in front of you right now are sponsored advertisements that Russian agents paid for in Russian rubles, and all three of these advertisements targeted kids under 18. And as you can see, all three of them don't actually have an element of falsity to them. The Instagram image invited parents to sort of send in photos of themselves and their kids to win a contest. And the two Facebook groups that are promoted are actually in opposing views. One says, don't shoot, we're not against police, we're against police brutality. And another one is a bit of like an opposite message where they're saying secure borders. But neither of these are false. These are targeting and creating communities on social media that essentially grew the audiences of these communities, and those audiences were then asked to take an action. So when we talk about disinformation and when we think about disinformation, that's partially why the language is so important and the language is kind of inadequate. It's really key for our readers to understand that it's not just the full-on falsehoods that they should watch out for. It's the fact that their interests and their worldviews can be targeted as well. And this is not just a foreign interference problem. So this is a story from 2017 that was written by the same person who was operating two different types of sites, one for the hyperpartisan left and one for the hyperpartisan right. This was really a for-profit operation run out of America, not Russians, not Chinese people, not Iranians. It's coming from inside the house. Another important thing to note is that both of these headlines are playing to people's emotions, which is a really key component of disinformation and social media manipulation campaigns working. So as you can see, one says, aren't you glad? Like, aren't you happy that Kellyanne Conway's gone? And the other one ascribes anger, like, oh, prepare to be infuriated. But both of those are strong emotions, and both of those are targeting particular audiences that wouldn't work in reverse. Unfortunately, we are also seeing a rise of social media manipulation and disinformation for hire. We're seeing this as both targeting US markets and targeting overseas markets. So this graph that you're seeing in front of you is shows the amount of takedowns by Facebook and Twitter of social media networks that were attributed to public relations firms or advertising firms. We've seen a huge growth in this area in 2009 and in 2019 and in 2020 we are likely seeing most takedowns include at least one or two advertising firms that are using social media to spread a message that they're being paid to spread. And the reason I mention this is because it's a real avenue for investigation. Most of these firms haven't had a lot of in-depth stories written about them and require a lot of sort of shoe leather reporting. A lot of the time when we talk about mis and disinformation, it can seem like you need extremely technical skills. But that traditional reporting skill of picking up the phone, calling former employees, calling people who may know something, and asking them what happened is still incredibly relevant to this beat. Just to belabor a little bit the point that disinformation targets specific communities. And it's really difficult to measure the impact that mis or disinformation, social media manipulation, and I hate that I have to say that whole sentence every time, but this issue targets particular communities. But we do have studies in terms of what gets the most engagement on social media. Now, engagement, so things like likes, comments, shares, retweets, it's not the perfect way to measure what is the most popular thing on social media, but it's the only thing that we have the tools to measure. So this is once again research from Oxford, and it shows the top shared junk news stories related to the European elections. And this chart shows that almost all of them were anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant. The targeted communities, the affected targeted communities is something that we really need to think about with regards to the 2020 election in the US, especially when it comes to voter suppression efforts that we know are already happening. And last thing I want to say is it's not always bad actors who are out to get either financial or political gain from spreading mis or disinformation. Sometimes it's the teens, and God bless their hearts, but they are a pain in the butt. So this is a really great example of a handful of young people who created a fake BBC breaking news account to say that Daniel Radcliffe was tested positive for the coronavirus. Now, the account was obviously fake because if you clicked into it, you would see that it had no followers. You can see from here that it's not a verified account. And even if you were to click on the link in this tweet, it wouldn't bring you to a story about Daniel Radcliffe. It would bring you to just like your boilerplate BBC News Alert page that says, here's how to sign up for BBC News Alerts. Unfortunately, this hoax was extremely effective and fooled a handful of reporters with very high profiles in the US and went viral. So there wasn't really a political motivation there. There was what is called cloud chasing, teens just looking to get retweets. But that is something that you should be aware of as a reporter, that the gamification of our social media means that sometimes users will use that gamification to pull a prank. So I wanted to talk to you guys about Plandemic, the now infamous video um, that that went hugely viral across social media. The video was filled with falsehoods, and it featured Dr. Judy Mikovits making claims that she couldn't stand up. The interactions from this video from the beginning of May, and we worked with First Draft to research this, were incredibly high. And the path the information took was essentially, it was posted to YouTube and then it was reposted to Facebook groups. So the interactions that you see in front of you here are from Facebook groups only. But we wanted to understand how it moved beyond the English language because of that circular nature of disinformation that I described earlier. And First Draft research showed that in non-English languages, it spread a lot, it had a longer tail. So it had lower interactions from what you can see. The peak was at 14,000 likes, comments, and shares on Facebook, but it was in play for a lot longer. And this matters because part of the way that this video spread is through diaspora communities, communities in the US that picked up this content and translated it to their own audiences in their own languages. This is something where if you have reporters in your newsroom who have second languages or third languages, and they're able to see how mis or disinformation spreads among the communities that speak those languages, it could be incredibly useful. In the case of Plandemic, Spanish was one of the most popular languages, followed by Portuguese, Italian, and German. The screenshot that you see on the right is Armenian, and somebody dubbed over the video in Armenian, and Facebook allowed it to stay up, unlike the English language fact checks that had an overlay or were taken down entirely. So even if you write a fact check targeting something in English, if it was translated in a different language, it could still be impacting your audience. And that's really important for you to understand, especially as you know, the US is not a monolith. The US is a country of immigrants. So if as you're looking at the 2020 election, you know that you have that audience, make a point of looking for non-English mis and disinformation in those audiences. And unfortunately, because it was translated further, it's also very likely that it went out of the US borders and was targeted in communities in those countries as well. So the flow of disinformation is very, very vast. So that was a lot of technical talk because we need to understand how social media perpetuates the issue. But our readers might sort of tune out when we start telling them about, you know, likes, shares, comments, things that they can't really fully relate to on an emotional level. So when we write about disinformation or social media manipulation, we really work hard to focus on people to the best of our ability, because this really does have an impact. Some examples of this is early on in April, back when we were still under lockdown, my colleague Craig Silverman spoke to nurses who said that they have to deal with coronavirus rumors and hoaxes and falsehoods on top of already working 12-hour days, 16-hour days, 20-hour days. That made for a very compelling story because readers were able to understand that something that's false online doesn't just stay online. Likewise, when the protests broke out in late May, early June after George Floyd's death, there were rumors that spread across local Facebook groups about anti-fascist activists essentially coming to destroy local towns. My colleague Anne Helen Peterson spoke to people in those towns and focused on the actions that the towns took to protect themselves as a response to these rumors. As a local reporter, that's something that you have the ability to do that national reporters might not always be able to do. And finally, after the Portland protests escalated following federal troops entering the city, me and my colleague Christopher Miller worked very diligently to speak to people in Portland to ask them how what they're seeing on television, how what they're hearing from the president and other politicians differs from what they're seeing on the ground. And this is incredibly valuable because it really cuts through the rhetoric in a way that saying, no, this is false, won't cut through the rhetoric. So centering those human voices is really key to connecting your readers to this problem. I mentioned before that a lot of shoe leather reporting is still required for online mis and disinformation. And that is still very, very true. Old school document requests, sleuthing through nonprofit income documents, asking sort of how that information may have been torqued or tweaked, that is incredibly important. And that can lead to some stories that people who only focus on online investigations might not be able to find. So in February, before the lockdowns even started, we found that a website that has contracted Stephen Bannon was spreading false information about where the coronavirus was originating. Those documents were key to telling this story. Likewise, we published in May an overview of the different spin doctors who were using their voices and their audiences to perpetuate falsehoods about the coronavirus. We relied on existing complaints, legal documents, past court cases to show that these doctors have not been considered credible in the past. And we really hoped and maybe achieved, up to our audience to know, that those documents really bolster what we're saying, which is that a lot of the claims that are made by the people mentioned in the articles are not accurate, and the history that they have, it needs to be taken into account here. And the last article that I want to point to is about past coronavirus research grants that were being used to smear Fauci. This was a flash pan moment where essentially using research grants that the national, sorry, I'm in Canada, so I sometimes forget the names of US institutions, but the National Institute of Health essentially gave grants to study coronaviruses to various laboratories all around the world. And those grants were brought up during a White House press meeting and were then being used to essentially say, make the claim that Fauci gave millions of dollars to the Wuhan lab. We dug up those grants, we spoke to the people, and we tried to get the fuller story. So those documents, that shoe leather reporting, that speaking to sources, getting contracts, and getting information in traditional ways is still incredibly important and effective on this beat. And I mentioned earlier that we need to be careful about not pushing false information forward. So some ground rules there is to stamp or watermark images. Instead of linking to the offending tweet, post, or website, link to an archive of it. That also makes sure that you preserve evidence of whatever happened online. Make sure to include the accurate information alongside the inaccurate information, and to the best of your ability, show how you got to that conclusion. When you decide, when you have the conversation about whether something is worth reporting on, some questions to ask is, did it go outside of sort of like a niche group of people that that may not have mainstream audience reach? Does it have the potential to cause real physical harm? And has it been amplified by people with large audiences online? All of those things. There's no like hard and fast line of when you should or shouldn't report on something. It's really like a gut check, and these questions can help you make sure that that gut check is pointing you in the right direction. I really want to stress the point of helping your audience as well. So when we do straight fact checks instead of the more robust stories, we make sure to explain to our audience how we got to that conclusion to the best of our ability. So for instance, when we were doing a live post with fact checks about the police brutality protests, we explained to our readers that the website doesn't have reporter names, it doesn't have an about page, it doesn't have a contact us page, which is why you should be looking further for that information. And this educates our audience a little bit and gives them the tools to do this work themselves if they come across something that may not have been immediately fact-checked. Likewise, I don't know if anybody remembers this happening at the beginning of the year, but sorry, bad joke about time. Back when the US killed Qasem Soleimani, and there was a military response, back when we worried about war and not just a pandemic, we were doing live debunks of that situation. And when we were doing those live debunks, we explained to our audiences that all we did was a simple reverse image search, and here are the results that we received. Therefore, this information is not accurate. So you as a reporter can do a little bit of media literacy education. You can really sneak that into your articles. Anecdotally, I can tell you that my audience is much more aware of these tools now than they were in 2016. So it really does have value. So I'm gonna give you guys a quick overview of the tools that we use to investigate some of these stuff. Like I said, this is not a be-all end-all. Definitely rely on traditional reporting techniques as well. I'm gonna explain to you what we use these tools for, and then I will give you a guide that will point you to a more robust understanding of these tools, just because we don't have a lot of time to go through their functions on a case-by-case basis. But if you are trying out these tools and you can't get them to work, or you're stuck something, or you have a bug, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I am very intimately familiar with all of them, and I will help you troubleshoot or find anything else, anything that you're not able to find. So the first tool that we use, the one with the red rectangle, is called CrowdTangle. This helps us monitor Facebook and Instagram, and also helps us better understand how something spread. So you can both search a URL, or you can search key terms and you can set something like a country, like you only want to look at something within the US, you want to look at something that's in the last year or in the last 24 hours. It really gives you a lot of options for searching Facebook that Facebook itself does not give. Facebook does own this tool. Most newsrooms should have it, but if you don't, you can contact CrowdTangle directly and they will most likely approve you for an account. Domain big data is a free tool that we use to look up domain registration information. So if you're coming across a sketchy website and you want to see who owns it, that's the best way to find out. Most of the time it will come up blank because of regulations in Europe that now shield who owns websites. But it is a useful tool to have in your arsenal. The one that I really want to explain that doesn't get as much fanfare is reverse AdSense and reverse analytics. And I find this to be much more useful than domain search. So every website that has a Google advertising account on it will have an AdSense code in there. And every website that uses Google to track how many visitors it got will have an analytics code in there. You don't really need to know what that code looks like. What you need to know is the website DNSlytics, where you can input the URL and it will find other websites with that code. The reason it's important is because if a person is making money from the AdSense on that website, it's very likely that the money from those ads will be going into the same bank account. So if several websites share an AdSense number, that probably means that the same person is getting paid for it. And I wanted to highlight BuzzSumo, which is another tool to search articles and terms. If you have questions about this, I know that this is a lot to take in, but if you have questions about it, pop them in the chat or ask me afterwards, and I'll be happy to do like a quick demo if this is really confusing, and I apologize if it is. For videos, there is a Chrome plugin called InVid, created by an organization called We Verify. It's another tool where you just enter the URL of the video that you found on social media, and it will essentially do a reverse image search for you across search platforms to look for other instances where that video has appeared. I also really like the Revi reverse image search extension for reverse image search. It allows you to look across different search engines and not limit yourself to just Google. Bing and Yandex are really good at facial recognition. So for example, if you see an account and you suspect that they stole somebody else's image, I would use Yandex reverse image search for that. Some archival tools that might come in handy. The archive.org Wayback Machine is indispensable, incredible. If you have questions, folks over there are super responsive and will help you through any issue. Archive.today is frequently used to save social media posts because Wayback Machine is not perfect in that regard. So archive.today is a great place to search social media posts that you think somebody else may have saved, or save your own. I also really want to highlight PolitiTweet, which keeps track of tweets deleted by politicians. So if something happened and you were offline and you want to see whether, like what a politician tweeted, that deleted tweet will likely be in there. And one more Chrome extension to recommend to you guys, Go Back. It's called Go Back in Time. And this allows you to search through pages that were saved by Google or Bing or any other search engine. This has often saved me from if all other tools fail. So those are the general tools, and I just want to reiterate that when you investigate online manipulation and disinformation, it's really important to not just get stuck on the Internet of Things. Definitely take the Internet seriously and definitely take everything that you see in the digital environment seriously, but apply your traditional reporting techniques. And also think creatively about how you want to find out a problem. Set a target for yourself, asking, okay, what is it that I want to find out? And then find the perfect tool. For us, like I mentioned, everybody at BuzzFeed is aware of this issue and applies it very differently to their writing and their beat. So if you're somebody who has access to training for your newsroom, training your entire newsroom in how to think about this and some of the quick tools they can use could be super beneficial. For further reading, just a few recommendations before we wrap up. The verification handbook is hot off the press. It was edited by my colleague Craig Silverman and includes very comprehensive step-by-step walkthroughs of the tools that I just highlighted. It's absolutely free. It is at the URL at the top there. It is an indispensable resource. And I also wrote a chapter on breaking news monitoring. So if as you read it through it, you have questions, definitely let me know. Data and Society is an incredible research institute that I go to all the time. And I would encourage you, to the best of your ability, read through all of their research. But the one that I recommend is called The Oxygen of Amplification, because it includes quick tips for reporters, but also really drives home what has and hasn't worked in the past when it comes to reporting on disinformation and social media manipulation. It's something that I learned a lot from, so I really encourage people to read through it. I know we're all short in time, but really encourage you guys to make time for this one. First Draft, the organization that I mentioned a few times throughout this talk, has dedicated trainings and webinars on different social media, including a really good one on TikTok. If your organization has been looking to do more on TikTok, I would highly recommend the First Draft training. And again, this is all absolutely free, so your newsroom won't have to spend a dime. And this is more advanced, so definitely come to this last after you've mastered all of the other things that I just mentioned. But Bellingcat is an online investigations outlet that really does in-depth, hands-on guides on how to use the internet in creative ways to uncover information. A lot of the stuff is more advanced. So if this is your first time coming into this, I would say look at the verification handbook first, look at the First Draft workshops first, but Bellingcat is also there as a resource for you, also free. We love free things. So that's it for me. You can find me on Twitter. This is my email. And if you would like to get a copy of this presentation, this will be live as long as I have a Google account, and it will be at this bit.ly address, API and DNS. And if you have questions, now is the time to ask them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jane, for that really comprehensive, but at the same time, I think, accessible presentation about how journalists can engage with these issues. While we wait for questions to pop in the chat, I just wanted to have one quick follow-up. Given kind of all the issues that you touched on, whether that's from the pandemic or protests, how have you seen or started to see narratives emerge around the election this year, or what are you paying attention to with that, if you have seen anything pop up?
So this election is really different because it the usual campaign got a little bit derailed by everything else that's happening in the world. But we're seeing early signs that the pandemic and the police brutality protests are definitely going to play into the election narratives that catch on. one really key narrative that we're already seeing take hold is around mail-in ballots. And this is true of both sort of the hyperpartisan press that I've highlighted and politicians who are spreading not fully accurate information about how mail-in balloting works. And this is where I fall down a little bit, because every time I learn about how American elections work, I'm like, you guys live like this. But essentially what we're seeing is politicians saying, okay, well, we cannot have mail-in ballots because people will perpetuate election fraud. So therefore we have to make people vote in person, which of course creates a huge barrier for anybody who doesn't want to get sick from the coronavirus. So that's an early narrative that we've already seen catch on a lot, that mail-in balloting will perpetuate voter fraud. Of course, there's no evidence that that is the case, but that is one that jumps out immediately. But as well, during 2018, we've seen anti-immigrant disinformation play a huge role in political campaigns, and I really want to highlight that. So even though the migrant caravan that was in the news a lot at the time was very, very far from the US border and really had nothing to do with the election, we saw politicians use racist arguments and make a lot of inaccurate statements about the migrant caravan as a way to scare their supporters, as a way of perpetuating those voter fraud claims. So that is something that I would be very, very conscious of, as well, as we saw that happen during the EU election as well. So those are two big narratives that, especially if there's those anxieties at a local level, I would say local reporters should be paying attention to.
Thanks, Jane. Folks, feel free, if you have questions, to pop those in the chat. I'm also giving folks the ability to unmute themselves if they want, if you want to ask a question that way. In the meantime, or you talked a little bit about how you'd be willing to, walk through some of the tools that you talked about with local journalists. I'm curious, either in the past or moving forward up into the election, are there ways that you think national journalists and local journalists can better collaborate and work together on these stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that can be really harmful to communities is when national reporters parachute into a situation and don't really fully understand the context of where they are, and maybe intentionally or unintentionally don't give the full picture to their readers. So that's something that when we spoke to people in Portland, that's something that they brought up a lot. So I would say for local reporters, it's probably pretty handy to start making contacts with those national newsrooms, especially if you're in a swing state or in a city where the protests are taking, the protests are very robust. Definitely make that contact with national reporters who are covering that on the beat. But I also really want to give another plug to First Draft here. First Draft has a project that connects local reporters, national reporters, researchers into essentially one Slack channel where everybody can talk. First Draft has been incredibly useful for us in helping with research, helping understand issues. You don't need to learn how to do your own research to be able to cover this stuff. So if you're somebody who is looking to make those connections, definitely check out First Draft and see if maybe that's an organization that can help facilitate those connections.
Awesome, and I know we have some First Draft folks on the call. If you want to share contact info or other ways that people can connect, please feel free. A couple questions coming in the chat. Actually, Smitha, did you have something that you wanted to say? Sorry.
I did have a question. Thanks, Andrew. So Jane, we've been speaking a lot about the importance of highlighting the material consequences of misinformation, of not just treating it like information is untethered and floating in the air. And you addressed this a bit in the slideshow, and I thought that was really lovely. My question is really about how you're thinking about public health. And I know we've been speaking about hydroxychloroquine a bit, and it just exploded in the news yesterday. We've been doing some work on dealing with that issue, and we're trying to get to the complexity of the way that scientific knowledge is produced and how reporters can convey that, especially in these places where the pandemic is just beginning to rear up and people are sort of just inundated in the same way that we were in here, New York, a few months ago. I'm wondering what your thoughts are watching this and what you think local reporters should really do in terms of addressing the overwhelming amount of medical misinformation and public health misinformation right now.
Yeah, so one thing that reporters can really do is find people who have been personally affected by that false information or by that narrative, and see if you're able to tell the story through their eyes. So one example that I gave in the presentation was my colleague Craig speaking to nurses who have personally felt the impact of hoaxes and false information. Likewise, look at your community. Look at how those gatherings and tensions are playing out. Go outside and sort of ask people what brought them to the protests. I mean, when we talk about the reopen protests, for example, a lot of the people who were encouraged to go out during those reopen protests were through Facebook groups. And there were a lot of pre-existing beliefs that that existed there. But I also really want to highlight this frame of thinking that that was brought to me by a man called Chris Goldsmith, who works for the Vietnam Veterans of America and focuses specifically on false information targeting those elderly veterans. And the way he thinks of it is essentially a health crisis. He says that, you know, if you're a veteran and you really rely on government benefits, or you really rely on accurate information getting to you in time, and you see something on social media that says your benefits are going to get taken away, that is going to be an incredibly stressful situation for you when it comes to your mental health and your financial impacts. And that really stuck with me because that's not something that we think about very often, of, you know, how stressful false information can be for people and how real that impact can be. And telling those stories, I think, really humanizes the issue of online false information. And I think that that humanization really drives the point home for people in a way that doing straight online research maybe doesn't. So if you're a local reporter and you have those sources within your communities who are saying like, yeah, actually I saw this and this really disturbed me, include that in your story, include those voices, ask them for their perspectives. Your readers, I think, will be better informed for it.
Thanks so much, Jane.
Jane, quick question as we approach the end of the hour. Would you be able to stick around for maybe 10, 15 more minutes as we had a couple questions roll in? Awesome. This is from Mark Ackerman. I think that builds on the last question a bit. I'm curious whether the Canadian political medical situation looks the same with respect to misinformation. So given your vantage point, how would you compare the two national contexts?
Yeah, so the medical situation in Canada is a little bit different. So there are certain aspects of health mis and disinformation that doesn't quite stick with Canada, especially with regards to testing. Testing for us is luckily widely accessible, but there are definitely false narratives that cross borders. We similarly, just down the street from me, we saw reopen protests the same way that we saw reopen protests in the US. We saw 5G conspiracy theories make a splash in Canada the same way that they made a splash in the US, in Europe, and in Australia. There are no borders on the internet, which sounds a little bit cheesy to say, but it is very true. And for us, even though our medical system is a little bit better, than the American medical system, that doesn't mean that those narratives don't stick. Something that we saw in our last election as well, which was last year, is we saw a rise of hyperpartisan news outlets in Canada in a way that we haven't really seen before. So this model, this business model of sort of targeting voters who are leaning one way or another politically also absolutely plays out in Canada. It plays out in my home country of Ukraine. It plays out in Europe. It plays out in Australia.
Great. So we have a question from my colleague, Emma Margolin at Data and Society, who's been researching census disinformation quite extensively. And it's based on a conversation we've been having a lot internally, and Jane and I, we've talked about this as well, about the basic vocabulary and framework of disinformation being potentially inadequate. It was something that was created around the issues that emerged in 2016, and we've seen these striking changes, including something that you mentioned to me last week, which is the way that misinformation and disinformation has become institutionalized. So a lot of the organizations, a lot of the places, the sources of misinformation are actually organized, similar to newsrooms, or organized and coming from nonprofits or PR firms. And so Emma's question is, can you expand a bit on how you find the disinformation framework vocabulary to be inadequate? And do you think this is an issue that research and academia can address? And if so, how?
Yeah, that vocabulary is absolutely inadequate, because as soon as I say the word disinformation to my grandma, her eyes glaze over, she tunes out, and she says, "That's nice, honey." And as soon as if that happens to my grandma, then that probably happens to my audience as well. And I want to say here that reporters on this beat specifically, we take a lot of cues from academia, because academics have been studying and digging into this problem in ways that many reporters just coming into this beat haven't. So the language, a lot of it sounds academic because it is academic. But academic language is not the most accessible language in the world. So we're in a situation now where, like, if I say the words online social media manipulation campaign, it doesn't really encompass what I'm talking about, right? Like, it doesn't encompass the fact that real images and videos playing to people's emotions are building up an audience, and then that audience is being asked to take an action. Like, that is a lot to get to our readers. So for academics and reporters, I would really encourage for academics especially, please, to the best of your ability, give us the simplest possible terms that you feel like we can think about in this problem. And for reporters, when you're writing about this problem, do stick to that grade 10 level that you're taught in journalism school. If a person in grade 10 can't understand it, then simplify it to the best of your ability. Put yourself in the shoes of your readers, put yourself in the shoes of a regular social media reader. And it's not always gonna be perfect. And part of it is that social media networks, when they take down these campaigns, they use this very sort of academic, research-focused language as well, and so we repeat it in our copy. But talking to your audience in simple terms is really, really valuable. And if academics can give us more terms that we can talk to that are simple, that are not overcomplicated, that are not 17 syllables long like my last name, that would be really, really useful, and I think a real service to this beat.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. I think that's really, really solid advice. One question, John had a question, but I'm going to ask Ryan's first. Ryan asks, thank you for your presentation. How do you see cybersecurity playing into this issue of disinformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I write a lot about cybersecurity because it's definitely a part of disinformation. Accessing leaked documents and spreading them in a strategic manner, as we know, was a key strategy in 2016. It was a key strategy in France, even though some of those documents weren't real. Having a basic understanding of cybersecurity issues, while is not key, I think could help bolster an understanding of what goes on with social media manipulation as well. And when it comes to the question of cybersecurity and disinformation, I would really recommend looking at the work of Citizen Lab, looking at the work of FireEye, looking at the work of Recorded Futures. Those are all, who am I forgetting? I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I just know I'm forgetting a couple of really good places. But there is research on how those two things intersect, and you don't fully need to figure it out yourself. There are researchers who are dedicated to this point. But disinformation is this tricky thing where it kind of intersects with everything because it focuses on everything. So you can think about it in terms of mental health. You can think about it in terms of economic impacts. You can think about it in terms of cybersecurity, which is why we say make sure that your entire newsroom understands at least the basics of this problem, because then they can understand how their beat and how their expertise is impacted by the disinformation problem. So there's really, there's not really like one way of thinking about disinformation, but cybersecurity is a good dimension to add to this.
Sweet, thank you, Jane. I have one more question, probably one that we can go ahead and end on, but I think it's an important message, this answer might be good on a practical level for local reporters that are interested in this. But we talk a lot about what works. I'm curious, especially for people who are new to this, what didn't work and what informed your thinking and your experiences on the presentation that you just gave? Is there anything specifically that didn't work, especially when it comes to communicating with audiences and convincing them about the gravity of the situation? And is there anything you stopped doing, or is there anything you stopped doing over the course of your beat that would be good for us to know?
Yeah, something that we, or I really struggle with a lot is I can uncover a bunch of fake accounts pushing a message. I can explain how I did it and what the message was. But because there's no human face on it, it doesn't resonate with readers. That's something that I've struggled with a lot when it comes to reporting, which is why doing only online investigations is something that I now advise against. It's through trial and error that that I came to that conclusion, and we came to that conclusion at BuzzFeed. So centering people is really key, because otherwise, like, people's eyes just glaze over. If you're like, I found a network of 147 Twitter accounts that were spreading a message that might have been beneficial to this government, like, it's just not an interesting story. The other thing that we figured out through trial and error is the correct way to frame fact checks and debunks when we do them. And that's to put the correct information first to the best of your ability. to do the stamping of images that we talked about, to do the archive link that we talked about, and to give, like, to show your work to as much as you can. That is something that we came to as trial and error as well. And the reason why that works is if a reader is able to repeat your steps when it comes to a debunk, even if they're not going to repeat those steps, they're going to trust your reporting a little bit more because it's something that they're able to do. It's something that is understandable to them. You know, doing a quick reverse image search or Googling a couple of terms is something that they can easily get to. So that showing your work component and educating your audience is also something that we learned from experience. And maybe as we end, this is a good time for me to once again plug in the verification handbook. Because it does go over a lot of these concepts. It goes over what does and doesn't work when it comes to writing about mis and disinformation. And it's filled with experts who always make themselves readily available. So if you're looking for an expansion of a lot of the thoughts that I've brought here, that's definitely the place to go. And I think, is that all the questions we've got at this point? Or is there more? Happy to do this.
I think that's it. Maybe one last call if anyone has one more question, but I think we're about ready to wind down now. So it looks like we don't have any questions. I'm gonna encourage everyone to reach out to all of us, to Jane, to myself, to Andrew and John in the coming months as we're dealing with these issues. We're really trying to find ways to help reporters on the ground communicate essential information to the public and really cut through this very difficult information ecosystem. I'll just leave it to Andrew and John to give us our last words, but thank you everyone for attending today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samantha. And thank you so much to Jane for her wonderful presentation and for spending extra time with us. Again, feel free to connect with her, with Data and Society, with First Draft, with us at the Trusted Elections Network. We can do all that connecting for you. And yeah, we'll keep working through this through the election and a little bit past the election. If you have any more questions or we're happy to answer those questions, try to offer resources, connect you with subject matter experts, and proceed on attacking this difficult problem. But thank you again. And unless Andrew has anything to say, we'll leave it at that. All right, folks. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.